So a major bombshell today. And I do try to stay away from using kind of the word bombshell in the show title unless it truly fits that description. This is a pretty serious one. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the guy that the Trump administration in the first term and the Biden administration trusted to handle the COVID-19 pandemic and the U.S. response to it. It now appears that not only in his not so private diary that he housed on government servers, his little memoir machine, that he was lying about how he viewed shutting things down. He also knew very, very early on, not just about the low fatality rate of COVID-19, the Chinese virus that leaked from the Wuhan laboratory. He also knew the effects that the mRNA, not really a vaccine, would take. So just as a quick policy note here on the show, from yours truly here, again, former science and anatomy and physiology teacher, the mRNA injections for COVID-19 developed by the medical organizations, I don't consider to be a true vaccination. It's not a weakened form of the virus that your body learns to fight in kind of a easy mode, Nintendo boxing match. No, this would be a direct series of instructions delivered via messenger RNA over to your body's immune system directly, telling them to just skip all of the other immune system steps and start producing massive amounts of antibodies. But there came with a series of risks. And a lot of individuals in this country, many of you here listening and to the show and watching it right now, were deplatformed, debanked. They were locked out of their livelihoods. Saying anything very outside at all of the Overton windows could see your entire career brought to a close and potentially degrees revoked. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin released today, though, a series of text messages between Dr. Fauci and other government officials in which they knew all the way back in early February of 2021 that, the mRNA injections were in fact a threat to pregnant women. They were, in fact, a threat to pregnant women. So let's dive, right into some of this stuff here. Let's actually tackle and kind of take a look at some of these things. So up front here, a series of these messages contain all kinds of crazy stuff. So for example, from Dr. Fauci back on January 25th of 2021, he said, quote, "I asked around a bit more, and another issue came up that you need to be aware of. Since many people have significant cytokine storm and fever after the second dose, it's theoretically associated with miscarriage in the first trimester." Now, that's a pretty serious thing, because if you actually look at the series of recommendations from the administration, from others in the broader medical system and sphere in the United States and around the Western world, people were encouraged to not only get the first but the second dose and then all of these boosters, and that it was totally fine. Even though CDC's Sasha Ellington in August 11th of 21 said, quote, "We are not seeing a signal of safety concerns of the vaccine in pregnancy. The vaccine can prevent COVID-19, so that's the primary benefit." Fauci was making it perfectly clear back in February 3rd, all the way through March and April, in a series of text messages that, in fact, there were some concerns that women who are pregnant could suffer significant medical risks. And again, I mean, it's very, very disturbing. Jay Bhattacharya, the replacement for the director of the National Institute of Health, he had this to say over on Will Cain today.
The new text release from Dr. Fauci's phone seems to be a different message privately than what he was telling publicly about the vaccine in pregnant women.
I mean, I'm really glad that his words now can be heard by the American people. And I share your concern. I think that when you have a new product like the COVID vaccine was back then, you should be careful with pregnant women. And it's shocking to me that he was sharing private thoughts, and that when he was out on public, and he was out in public a lot, he didn't share those private thoughts with the American public. I mean, to me, the big problem now is really, how do you restore trust in public health? How do you restore trust in science? And, that's what I've been working toward at the NIH, to really shift toward a transparent regime where there's scientific debate, scientific discussion, no debates off limits. I fully expect there to be people that disagree with me. And when I learn that I'm wrong, I'm going to tell the American public that I'm wrong. We have to turn the page from that.
And you have the job that he once had. that puts pregnant women in a really bad position. You're withholding information from them, giving them a recommendation that could potentially harm their baby. I don't know the process when you're the director of something like the NIH, but if you have reservations, shouldn't the public know those reservations?
I mean, especially for something like the COVID shots, which were brand new back then. I mean, and Tony Fauci was a major figure in trying to get those COVID shots off, past the finish line. He owed the American public some transparency regarding his honest thoughts. Generally, it's the FDA that regulates products and checks for side effects and so on. The NIH develops the science that produces the new vaccines. There's usually like one lane and another lane. Tony Fauci, in some sense, was out of his lane. Push and then use that power to tell the American one thing when he really thought another.
And that's the real issue here. Now, the questions that have been coming in, again, very, very apropos, given the consistent problems that we have seen from the Biden administration, especially, that if you questioned anything at all, and again, not just questioned whether or not certain things were effective, but if you simply said, if I have these pre-existing conditions, if I have this special case in which I have an autoimmune disorder, in which I am also, for example, fighting Lyme disease, if I get pregnant or seeking to get pregnant, should I go through with getting these? If you said anything at all in the public sphere about expressing some restraint or concern, you would be completely debased. In fact, again, Anthony Fauci would say publicly in February of 2021, quote, "The FDA has found thus far, and we have to be careful, but thus far, no red flags about that, no red flags about pregnant women." Rochelle Walensky, April 23rd of 2021, again, head of the Centers for Disease Control, she had this to say.
Importantly, no safety concerns were observed for people vaccinated in the third trimester or safety concerns for their babies. As such, CDC recommends that pregnant people receive the COVID-19 vaccine.
I mean, at some point you have to ask, what kind of consequences are there going to be? Well, the Biden administration, on his way out the door, auto-penned a pardon for anything, everything, possibly, maybe, sort of, kind of, maybe even just a smidgen. That was what was set up for Fauci. And then Fauci, once asked to go before the Senate committee, they simply asked him a very standard series of questions about diary entries and what he knew and what he didn't know, and found that well, I mean, it's my Fifth Amendment. And then they asked him what day it was of the week. And, I have the Fifth Amendment. And then they asked him what his name was. He said, I have the Fifth Amendment. And I don't think you can do that. Now, this is going to give the Department of Justice more teeth to launch some kind of an investigation. I'm not quite sure yet. We've reached out to the Department of Justice. We've asked what it is that they are currently pursuing, given the recommendation of the Senate committee chair. Again, the Senate itself, the full Senate of the United States, has not voted on holding Anthony Fauci in contempt. And they're currently on a mystical sort of halfway recess adjournment. So that's a bit of an issue, given that right now, a lot of Americans are hoping that at least before the midterms, that Fauci is held in some kind of a contempt. But again, Fauci isn't held in Senate contempt right now. He was voted that, he mostly in contempt. Please, DOJ, do your best and investigate him. Now, Todd Blanche has now been made the full Attorney General of the United States. He was confirmed. But it doesn't just stop with Anthony Fauci. More texts reveal, this is according to Bill Malugin, kind of digging through a lot of these things over at Fox, that U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy responded to Fauci's concern about the COVID vaccine in pregnant women by adding, quote, "I've been hearing concerns about the mRNA causing mutations in the developing fetus as well," end quote. None of these concerns were ever made public. Now, the concern here is that a woman writing to her child via a series of DNA instructions, giving little bits of adjustment here and there from her genetics, if there are some mismatches between the child and the mom, as some of the different proteins, different functions inside little organelles inside the cells are scanning to make sure everything matches and everything lines up. As you have these, again, if you have between a mother and a child certain disconnects, the child might try to reconfigure a couple of things to match what it's reading from the mom, like a double check kind of a system. Well, if the mom has received the mRNA COVID injections, and the child is receiving essentially a stop, rewrite something and go back, it carries with it a greater risk of mutation. That was the concern. Fauci didn't express any of these concerns because anything that undermined the public's trust in the COVID-19 injections were a no-no. Radio crew, we have to send you over to the commercial. A lot more to cover in the meantime. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Now, while they're over at their commercial break, what does this actually mean downstream for the country? Because again, when you're looking at an over 70% rate of women who in the first trimester of their pregnancy who had received the second shot of the COVID injection, over 70% would end up miscarrying. That's a very, very, very serious bit of medical malpractice. So if there were possible questions or concerns that way back in January, in February of 2021, Fauci was sending texts. I mean, there were entire lawsuits that were based on this kind of stuff. Greg Price, a good friend, points out that during the Murthy versus Missouri lawsuit, it was revealed that the Biden CDC was sending daily emails to Facebook demanding that they censor posts that raised concerns about the COVID vaccine impact on pregnant women, which it now seems that privately, Murthy and Fauci agreed there were significant concerns. That's a problem. That is a serious, serious problem. Again, by the way, as far as vaccines are concerned, because I understand that the flu vaccine has like an mRNA piece to it this year, it's kind of a different method of doing so. It's not a vaccine when you are simply telling the body to create a very specific series of antibodies. And by the way, your body is not simply held to host a ton of antibodies constantly circulating at all times, constantly producing. Your immune system has like 40 different cells, and they all act in a very, very specific and detailed manner. Antibodies are not the first approach. They're not. They're a recognition response. But anyway, that's another topic and another science lesson for another time. The national downstream effect of this is that the American people are simply never, ever, ever going to trust anything from the federal government when it comes to health advice ever again. And you may say, well, maybe that's good. Maybe they should be naturally skeptical. When you have millions and millions of people who are unvaccinated and carry with them third world diseases streaming into the United States unfettered during a 4-year period, and they are now in your community, and it doesn't matter if Immigration Customs Enforcement comes in and removes them. It doesn't matter if Immigration Customs Enforcement actually enforces federal law regarding this, that, and the other. If just the idea, the framing of this entire debate has created a culture of fear around any kind of national medical advice regarding vaccines, it is going to cause significant disease outbreaks. And by the way, who knows the 10, 20, 30-year effects that we are going to face as a nation of a lack of trust in institutions regarding health and medicine. We're already seeing this, by the way, in regard to elections. Every single election now is contested because no one trusts the institutions themselves that are building them.